Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in to an official 2024 college football schedule preview where I go through three different teams' schedules, kind of give you my view on how hard their schedule is, when are the tough games, and all of it. I did this exact same thing last year at around this time, just to kind of get a feel for teams. Now, we are going to start with Ohio State. We're going to do Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State today. The Buckeyes, a very easy non-conference schedule. The first thing you'll notice, though, when you look at this schedule is the double bye. Every team has a double bye next year. It's just the way the calendar falls. But Ohio State, extremely easy games versus Akron, Western Michigan. They get a bye week 3. That's one of their byes. And then they get Marshall at home. So Will Howard breaking in should be a guaranteed 3-0 start. You are at Michigan State. Michigan State will be an interesting team with Aiden Childs, Jonathan Smith, but you would expect early in the season Ohio State on the road, probably a noon start time, maybe big noon, I don't know. It's very hard to predict what channel these games are going to be on because it could be a 3:30 game on CBS, it could be a 7:30 game on NBC, but at Michigan State, I would expect Ohio State to have no problems. They get Iowa at home. Certainly, you can kind of understand the narrative for Iowa being better next year, considering they're going to be getting a new offensive coordinator finally. But Ohio State, facing Iowa at home, they faced them at home like 3 years ago and won 54-10, I think. So they should have no problems. And then the first tough game for Ohio State on the road at Dillon Gabriel in Eugene to face the Oregon Ducks. Will they have Dan Lanning? Will Dan Lanning go to Alabama? We will see. I would imagine Oregon, based on how big, their NIL is, based on the Nike money, they'll be able to keep Dan Lanning, and Ohio State should be a virtually guaranteed undefeated 5-0 team, top 5 team in the nation, going on the road. Maybe a 7:30 NBC game, which would be 4:30 Pacific time. I would imagine that's what they're going to do for that game. And then Ohio State after gets a bye week. They get Nebraska at home, possibly Dylan Raiola starting as a true freshman. Dylan Raiola was previously committed to Ohio State. That could be a fun game. You'd expect Ohio State easily to win that one, though. At Penn State, very challenging. We will see what happens in terms of possibly this being the whiteout game for Penn State, maybe the NBC 7:30 game. Big Noon is probably going to try and take it, but next year the TV rights are a little bit different. Big Noon is not going to get all of their picks, so maybe Penn State gets the whiteout game there. They will, have a returning quarterback. They're going to have some continuity. We will see. Ohio State then hosts Purdue. These three games are very easy for Ohio State. Purdue at Northwestern, and then Indiana at home should be 3 guaranteed wins, and then they do get Michigan at home. You would figure that's a must-win game for Ohio State. They're 0-3 against Michigan in their last 3. Ryan Day right now is 1-3. Michigan does lose significant talent. Ohio State is returning a lot. So for the Buckeyes, when I look at this schedule, you're talking about 5 easy games to start the season, guaranteed 5-0, and then you get 2 very tough games at Oregon and at Penn State, almost back-to-back. There is a bye and Nebraska in the middle, and then you get 3 more easy games, and then the game at home hosting Michigan at the end of the year for the Buckeyes. Moving on to Michigan's 2024 schedule, and this is going to be a lot harder to kind of predict how hard these games actually are going to be because we don't know if Jim Harbaugh is going to be back, if he's going to be suspended, if J.J. McCarthy is going to be back, if some of these other players are going to be back. But Michigan, they do return a decent amount on defense. I will say that. And they begin with Fresno State, who's a decent team that kind of tailed off towards the latter part of the year. I would expect, obviously, Michigan to win that game, the first non-conference game, the first game of the year. And then they get Texas week 2. And by the way, the rankings, you don't pay attention to the rankings, but Texas probably will be like a top 4 or top 5 team. It'll be a very interesting game. Michigan could be without Jim Harbaugh. They could be breaking in a new quarterback. That could be very hard, even though it is at home. It's a huge non-conference game. I would imagine that's going to be a 7:30 game on NBC, or maybe ESPN. I'm not sure who has the rights to that. Then they get Arkansas State. Very easy win there. USC at home, that could be challenging. That's a very fun game considering you've got all these teams from the Pac-12 joining the Big Ten. You're going to get more of these games like this where USC is traveling to the Big House with Miller Moss, all of the hype surrounding it, Lincoln Riley. USC with a new defensive coordinator, a new look. Should be a fun game. Minnesota at home, you'd expect Michigan to win that. At Washington, that'll be interesting. There's your national title rematch. Now, Washington does lose a lot. I would expect Washington to have a significant step back. A lot of people are going to prop this game up in the preseason and say this is a huge matchup. I think Washington's going to lose 4 or 5 games next year, guys. I don't think this is going to be that big of a matchup. And then Michigan gets their first bye week. This is a better setup than Ohio State. They get their bye weeks later in the season, October 12th. And then they're on the road at Illinois. I can't tell you the last time Michigan went to Illinois. That's a very rare game. They get Michigan State, the rivalry, but it's at home. You get Oregon at home. That's another huge game. So how about that? USC at home and Oregon at home for Michigan. On the road at Indiana, you would figure that's a guaranteed win. They get their second bye week and then just 2 more games. So a very nice setup towards the end of the season for Michigan. Once you're past Oregon, you get an easy game versus Indiana. You get a bye week, which is going to be fully prepping for Ohio State, I'm sure, because you get Northwestern at home and then on the road at Ohio State. So the end of the season, it does kind of lighten up a little bit, but you do have 3 crazy, huge home games and then 1 seismic, actually 2 bigger road games at Washington, at Ohio State. But how about the home schedule? Texas, USC, Oregon, even MSU. If you're a Michigan fan and you've got, season tickets next year, you're going to see a lot of good teams coming into the big house. So that is Michigan's 2024 schedule. And then moving on to Penn State, you can see they start off with the second half of their home and home. They will be at West Virginia. That was the first game of the season this year. They crushed West Virginia. Now they're on the road. That could be a tough game for Penn State. Very annoying. It's going to be the first game of the year. There's going to be a raucous environment. Probably going to be a night game. Annoying football game for Penn State. I think they win it because James Franklin normally wins games like that. If he's more talented than a team, he'll win. So I would expect them to win that. They get Bowling Green right after. That's an easy win. And then you got an off week, Penn State. So back-to-back MAC teams. Very easy start to the schedule after kind of an annoying game at West Virginia. You get Illinois at home. Another you would expect to win. UCLA at home. You would expect to win. Chip Kelly's kind of interesting. They've got some talent on that roster. They lose Dante Moore. But that roster is still... They still have some offensive playmakers, but the fact that that game is at Penn State, I certainly think Penn State's going to start the year, 5-0, and then they're on the road at USC. Very challenging game. They get another off week, and then they're on the road at Wisconsin. That is not a fun game. Now, Wisconsin underperformed greatly this past year, but it was the first year of Luke Fickell. They did get Tyler Van Dyke. We'll see what happens with Wisconsin. It's an annoying game, especially if it's at night. Even you look at Ohio State going to Wisconsin this past year, albeit Ohio State, looking back on it, Kyle McCord, not a very good quarterback, but they still struggled with Wisconsin. And then they get Ohio State at home. They get Washington at home. Those are 2 tough games, especially the Ohio State game. I'm guessing one of them could be the whiteout, because they're probably not going to choose UCLA as the whiteout. Then they're at Purdue, very winnable. You would expect to win. At Minnesota, you would expect to win. And then they get Maryland to end the season at home. That is another schedule to where you're looking. The middle of the schedule is brutal. The first 5 games, Penn State should really set themselves up as a 5-0 football team, top 10 team in the country, traveling on the road to the Coliseum, and that's a huge game for Penn State. If they can win that game, you would figure you would have such a big margin for error with the 12-team playoff. If you can somehow beat USC, you can easily lose to Ohio State and Washington and still make the playoff. Or let's say you lose to USC and Ohio State but beat Washington, you're in the playoff as well. So there's a lot of combinations for some of these teams to make the playoff because it is expanding. But when you look at these 3 schedules, certainly it looks like Michigan has the toughest schedule because they do have that non-conference game with Texas. They also have USC, Washington, Ohio State, Oregon as well. But either way, guys, those are just Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State's future 2024 schedule. It's going to be a lot different now with the teams joining the Big Ten with all of this conference realignment. You're going to get these exotic matchups, if you will, like UCLA traveling to Penn State. I'd love UCLA to travel to Penn State and it starts snowing. I think they're a little bit too early in the year for that, but either way, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.